Welcome to Clap Back Get the Facts podcast, where we are providing you with the information you need to know about what's politically impacting Black women across the country. In a world filled with mis and disinformation, we provide you with the real. If you're a Black woman, representing Black women, or in the community with Black women, we are here to clap back and give you the facts. Thank you for joining episode 16, Engaging and Mobilizing Intergenerational Campaigns. We will be sharing the facts and dropping gems. So let's get ready to clap back, get the facts.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Clap Back, Get the Facts. My name's Holly Holiday. I'm the president of Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote, and the co-host of Clap Back, Get the Facts. Today, we're going to be talking about political trends. We're going to be talking about things that inspire, encourage, and motivate new or inconsistent voters for turnout elections. We're particularly going to dig into what that looks like for young Black women, because y'all know we do Black women over up in here. This cycle, we see that the trends to communicate to voters and what issues matter to voters is shifting some. So we'll talk about that. And we know that the two largest voting blocks in this election are going to be the baby boomers and Gen Z, like me and co-host Chantel Mullins. Chantel, what's up? Hey, girl, hey.
Ah, there I am. Hey.
Hey. And
how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Back from DNC and ready to get into helping to make sure all the voters vote. Although, I'm going to be relying on you to do most of the heavy lifting. And of course, the next largest voting block with the probably least amount of participation at this point is in the next generation down. And that's represented today by Simone Henderson. Hey, girl, hey.
Hey, y'all.
We're going to have all the points of view from the people who vote all the time, represented by Chantel, and the people who vote when they feel like it. That's what I'm going to call it.
The shade.
Listen, it's not the shade. I think it has to do, and we're going to get into it. We're going to get into what the differences are between these two groups. We're going to talk about it a lot, just to sort of level set. I think we certainly know from a baby boomer, Gen Z type of situation, we're dealing obviously with older people, people who are more established in their careers, folks who are now probably not just raising children, but have raised children and are moved on to having adult children who have children of their own, folks who are probably more interested, or at least thinking more what do I want to say, focused on things related to Medicaid and retirement than they are educational systems and career opportunities, which are things that we tend to associate with younger voters. And meanwhile, younger voters are struggling, although certainly we see this amongst older voters as well, but struggling to figure out what a future looks like for them, where they aren't able to afford even some of the things that they saw their parents being able to afford. They don't see a pathway to home ownership. They may be suffering from student loan debt. They may be suffering from a series of our serial low wage or low paying jobs, and may in fact have limited skill sets, and so on and so forth. So the difference between these two folks from a life experience is certainly wide, although I would argue interconnected, because let's face it, we all are living and experiencing this society together. All right, let's jump into it. Let's start with this. Let's talk about the older folks first, because I suspect most of our conversation is going to be around these young folks, because honestly, that's who everybody cares about. And then let's be honest, that's the most growing segment of voters. It is the opportunity where, because they haven't voted, either because this is their first voting cycle or because they haven't been engaged. So this is really a wide open field. So before we get into them, let's just talk a little bit about what are some trends that we're seeing with older voters. How do we see them responding? We have now cleared both conventions. How do we see them responding to the presidential race? And are there other things that are showing up on the ballot that we think have their attention? I'll throw that to either one of you. What are your, actually, let me start with Simone, because we always start with Chantel. And I'd like to know what you think about us old folk voters.
What do you mean? Pave
I'm
the
saying, what do you see as
way.
some of our trends? And, what do you see us leaning into?
I see, and I think, what we see a lot. Are you talking about from my perspective or overall, without any young folks bias?
You handle both. We respect your opinion.
I think overall, it's so instilled the importance of voting and turning out and really understanding or living through the evolution of your vote meaning more and the power of it and what it can do and the impact that it has on so many different segments. Because I think people just look at, unfortunately now it's like, oh, I vote for a president, but I'm not seeing the 15 things that they campaigned on happen on day one. So what did I really vote for? And so I think that some of that communication has kind of broken down exactly the three branches of government and what exactly they do and what people are voting for. I think that is lost somewhere in junior high or before we ever walk across the stage in high school, if we make it that far. So I think that has kind of unraveled and has diminished the impact, I would say, that is instilled with what the vote means. And so I think there's sometimes are frustrating conversations that older generations have when they're trying to break through on why people should turn out, when people are saying, but what real change are you seeing? And it's like, well, you don't understand what it took to get to this point, the possibilities of what your vote can do. And I think that is where we sometimes hit the roadblock of connecting the dots on what exactly all your vote can do when you use it and exercise it. And I think some critique is you can't, or it's not received well these days when you say, well, you have the right, you should just be voting. People are like, no, and it's like, but then you do realize it's going to be a trickle effect of that. It's going to become harder and harder to undo the things that are making your life difficult today. So I think preach as a lack of bad words to use, if there's this kind of preachiness about why people need to show up and vote and why and what all it's linked to, that just fails to hit the mark with some generations.
Chantel, what say you about your peers?
Well,
about your people.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. One, I think if we step back and look at it, the group that votes the most is the group that's the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And they show up most consistently and most reliably. And the rest of the groups are inconsistent. Mm-hmm. So I think the young folks tend to think that it is preachiness, when what I actually think it is experience. Mm-hmm. And that young folks don't respect they want their experiences to be respected, yet they're not reciprocating to see why is it that this demographic is showing up at such a high rate, and that demographic is actually getting things that they want. Politicians, as I always tell people, politicians really are very simple creatures. They're responding to votes and money. And young folks ain't got no money. So y'all need to be coming with your collective votes. And it's really just that simple. And we make it harder. And that's a song. It could all be so simple, but we'd rather make it hard. Come on, Lauryn Hill. And it really is. It's a collective. And so, You know, the other day I was out walking, and for some reason I started thinking about ants and bees. They're some of the smallest creatures in the world. And individually, we can whoop an ant. We can step on that ant. We can kill that bee. But when they have a hive mentality, they can take down almost anything. And so for some of our voters, we have become so individualistic. We have forgotten the power of our collective, and that we've got to go out and get our people together and get these votes. They're not
responding. You say some of our voters. Are we talking older voters or younger voters?
Younger voters, because I think older voters get it.
People, I got it.
Older folks get it because they've gotten it through experience. But there are also some other dynamics that I believe are at play. One, Holly and I are at the end of the civil rights generation. And what was happening at the end of the civil rights generation is there were more explicit threats. Mm-hmm. There were people being hanged, people being killed, people standing outside of precincts with polling. You were getting fired for voting. The right to vote was only given like right before we were born. And so we have a different experience. Mm-hmm. So the young folks don't have that experience. It's kind of like healthcare now. Y'all don't remember pre-existing conditions. See, I remember going to the doctor and filling out all of those forms. I remember folks getting rejected for healthcare. Y'all have grown up during the age of the Affordable Care Act, where pre-existing conditions were not a thing anymore that could keep you from getting health care. So we have actually made progress, mm-hmm. but we haven't really talked to y'all about how that progress happened and what that progress used to look like, which is why the snatching of Roe v. Wade made it real crystal clear to y'all. Right, but it's clear. It's clear to some of y'all. Some of y'all didn't get it before are getting it now.
Agreed. And I think
and didn't have a healthy respect for the work that was done to get folks to that place either, though.
And I agree in here, and I hope I spoke to some of that when I said, you all lived it and grew up in it,
but here's the point I want to correct before you go any further. Mm-hmm. We did not live it. As Chantel just said, I think that's the part that gets misconstrued. And that's why for those of us who are true Generation Xers and not baby boomers, even though we vote more akin to a baby boomer, we mm-hmm. do so because of experiences that we heard about, not that we lived. By the time we came along, most of us is after, we were born after the Vietnam War. So you're talking about civil rights has already been passed and basically in effect. You're talking about people who now spent more time or had an opportunity to spend as much time growing up in the suburbs and rural areas as they did the cities. You're talking about a group of people who during our lifetime, just as a perspective, went from albums to cassette tapes to CDs to streaming. All of that happened during the Generation X lifetime. And so we're able to kind of bridge the gap, if you will, which is why, to Chantel's point, I think, you do have a lot of people in our age group who did not grow up under a collective action mentality, grew up under a very individualistic mentality, especially those 80s and 90s babies, right? Who grew up thinking about themselves, thinking about, and we passed that down probably to the next couple of generations. And we're just now getting back to a collective action. But, for most of us, with the exception of a few folks who, like me, ended up protesting in the A building in college, we did not live a life of protest. We weren't out with picket signs. I happened to be a part of a protest that was taught to us by some 60s and 70s babies when I went to college. But frankly, we were sitting around in the A building, not really knowing what the hell we supposed to be doing to protest our president at that time. But that was an anomaly. Most of my friends, I can truly say, have never participated in a protest, if we're being honest. Are we aware of protests? Yeah. Have we gone to commemorative things of protest? Yeah, I went to the anniversary of the March on Washington, but my butt wasn't marching on Washington, So I think that is a difference, in the way that the generation sees things. I think the way we get defined, however, is what happens in life. We begin to recognize and understand, not through education, unfortunately, but usually, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say through our experiences, the connection between the thing that's causing us angst and pain and politics, which ultimately gets back to voting. But you'll see, in fact, if you look at, and I'm speaking specifically to Generation X as opposed to the baby boomers, because of their protest, because of their fight back, and because of the things that they were taking on at the time, many of them started voting much earlier. I can say amongst my peers, most of them, they probably wouldn't admit it today, but I know for sure most of them started voting more like in their 30s instead of in their teens. How do I know? Because when I was 18 going to the polls, they was at the party. And this was before early vote and a lot of those other democracy things that we have now. So I think in that way, Gen X's can understand some of the perspectives, even though we want it to be different. I'll let you finish your statement now.
Oh, no, am I frozen?
No, you're good.
Oh,
No.
okay. So I hear and understand, and I think both of you have highlighted a very important point of, because I'm born in the 90s, and both of you have kind of spoke to what you all experienced. So we talk about what my generation has experienced and the things that may have been passed down on our experiences. Then you're talking about, as children, we see how many different mass shootings.
Right.
My generation is the one where we're doing school shooter drills, and I'm at the end of the 90s, so I would have been one of the first to start that. And so you're talking, I'm starting that in 5th elementary school.
Yeah.
So all of the things, and then you have Sandy Hook when I'm junior high, early high, one of the two, somewhere around there. And you see where there begins to be this reemergence of protest and whatnot, because it doesn't matter who's in office. We're not seeing legislation being passed that's protecting even the smallest of children, the smallest of bodies. We're not seeing these things that have led to people developing this more pessimistic mindset that although all your generation came in on the back, it comes after civil rights, and you all didn't have to live through those same things and kind of got to experience firsthand immediately the benefits, or some of the benefits of coming about. We're kind of seeing this almost knee-jerk reaction of, I hate to say the word complacency, because we know you continue to show up, you continue to advocate that none of these things are set in stone as yours. But I think when you see the frustration that exists, it's because it's like there's such this loud and consistent communication about what all was done to change and to get us where we're at? What takes us to that next step? Because for the past few years, we have not seen essentially that next step be taken, because I think people have said, okay, yes, we know that that's the life you got to live. Great. This is the life I'm currently living. And so can you connect these dots for me? And I think both of you all kind of tapped in on that, as that from boomers to Gen X and to whatnot. If we have now gotten to my generation and we're not seeing that same need, or that need to be out there and to continue this fight, where, not blame, but where do we begin to say that that was the last dot that was connected and this is where we're at? And we begin to have conversations like this to talk about what are some of these intergenerational tactics that we can use to begin reconnecting those obvious dots that are not being connected now, as I think is where the conversation would be good to be situated in.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's go to and break down as we transition into talking about young women voters. I want to highlight a recent poll that has come out by Supermajority Education Fund. The poll was put together by Hit Strategies, Lake Research Partners, and the Supermajority Ed Fund. They did this research highlights the priorities of young women in 2024. One thing that they did, which we're showing here, is they segmented the target audience into 3 parts. First, and you see that the smallest group are the idealists. These are people who are positive for all, the future, the country, the planet. These folks believe government works effectively. Here's the interesting thing, because I think older, I don't see this associated as much with Republicans, but these idealists are mostly Republican, more likely to be Republican. They have post-high school education, but not necessarily college, are married, but don't have kids and live in urban areas. And so I think this is a really interesting mix of people. I'm not sure if this is the way I would have defined this group prior to this research. The largest group of young women that we see are discouraged realists. This represents nearly half of women ages 18 to 35. They have at least one reason that they're negative. They're concerned about their own future. They have concerns about the direction the country is going in, or the planet, which often breaks down into concerns about the environment. They don't believe the government works effectively today, but do hold out hope that it could get better. They are very sporadic voters and generally non-voters overall, but they are slightly more likely to have a college education. And the reason that that's disturbing is because this is a non-voting group, but also the largest group. And then finally, the pessimists, which is the second largest group with 20%. Most of whom are negative about all the things. They think the future is doomed, the country is doomed, and the planet right along with it. They don't believe government will ever work. They tend to be more in the 25 to 35 year range, so a little bit older amongst the young women. They tend to be married with kids and generally have a lower level of education. Go to the next slide for me real quick. This slide really shows that basically they are fed up with voting and they are fed up with politics. You'll see this kind of broken out, these feelings of frustratedness, hopelessness, anger, indifference. And you'll note here that the hopelessness and frustration is highest, obviously with the pessimist, but not too far behind the discouraged realist. And so what this says to me is that when we are communicating with this particular audience, we really need to think about not just what they care about in terms of the issues, but how it is making them feel and whether or not they feel they have power. And more importantly, do they connect the power that they think they may have to voting? And I think too often the question is no. And the reality is, and I'm going to just do this last slide quickly here, is that of this group, most don't really think of that you get that the question was asked, how much power do you feel your vote has to make a change? And as you can see, most did not feel like it really made a difference. I think, and there was a rank of 1 to 10 here, and you see the majority, in fact, were 0 to 4. And I think that part of that gets into this idea, two things. One, I don't think the people who are advocating on behalf of issues are doing a good job of communicating to this segment of potential voters, because I'm not going to refer to them as voters because actually they're not. But potential voters, I don't think there's enough intentionality spent educating this group of potential voters. And so therefore, unlike folks who are receiving a lot of information, they're not able to make the connection for themselves. And two, they don't recognize that your vote is important, even if what you voted for is not successful. It doesn't mean that because you voted for something that did not, in fact, pass, that your vote is meaningless. And I think that's a conversation that we just don't have enough.
I agree.
Take the slides down and go back to our panel. Given this information, I know what we fundamentally want to move into is, as we begin to understand this voting, again, I hate to refer to them as voter, but I'm going to say this demographic cohort of non-voters. What does this say about how we should be communicating with this cohort? And does it fundamentally mean that we have to segment out this group of young voters differently from the way we might talk to young voters who are more engaged?
Well, you know, Holly, you and I have had long and many conversations
Yes,
about
let's
the various demographics. And so, you know, I was sitting here reading this report, and I'm just going to tell you candidly what my first thought was.
go ahead.
After I read all of this. If we had to depend on this group to vote us out of slavery, we would still be in slavery.
Yes, and yes, I agree.
So that's my first thought. But
that might be my only thought. Go ahead.
No. Well, but then again, this is what my frustration has been about voter education.
Okay.
We're still talking to people as if we are in the civil rights movement. Okay. And we need to shift to a new paradigm, because in that era, it was really apparent what the consequences were. So you didn't have the time to be frustrated, because you had to save your life, because thinking about voting could get you killed. And so we don't have that as a worry. Now our worry is, can we get people to vote? Because we had people who were risking their lives to register people to vote and to actually vote. Once you take that off the table, you have people who are in the middle. We're in the meantime. And so we need to start figuring out how to educate people to the next step, because what has happened is we've gone backwards. They understand that. But we shouldn't always have to have a pain point to get progress. And that is how we've made progress. We've made progress because people have died, people have been beaten, people have been fired, people have been intimidated, people have been harassed. We're sliding in that direction, but we have to learn how to move beyond being threatened and harassed to keep the pedal to the metal. I absolutely love what is happening in politics right now, because there's so many people who are engaged. But what absolutely worries me is people are saying, I have to be excited to be engaged. I don't have to be excited to be engaged. I have to be strategic to be engaged. Because if I always have to entertain you, I always have to. The majority of our politicians are regular old folks. They're boring, they're nerds, they're wonky, they can't speak. They're not, most politicians are not great orators. And so when we start setting the bar that you have to be all of these things, instead of it's just your community members, it's just your people on your block. They may have a speech impediment. They may be in a wheelchair. They may be a one-eyed, one-horn, flying purple people eater.
All
But if
right.
they represent, I know I just dated myself.
You really
But
did.
if they represent what you need them to represent, it's not going to look like a reality TV show. It's going to look more like real life. And we have gotten into, I need to be excited. I don't understand it. Because personally, I don't have to be excited. What I'm excited about is when I see a policy and I can see how that policy is going to impact my community. Because there are a lot of people who can talk a good game, but they can't pass policy worth a damn. And that's when people.
To be fair, we've been largely a country that is driven by personality politicians for most of our history. So the fact that we continue to have that, continue that perspective is not foreign. I mean, from the moment television showed a handsome JFK, there has been a correlation between the polished politician and the curmudgeon policymaker.
And if one thing I can add here is, I think, to the point that you all bring up entertainment, I think that's where we may, and you pointed this out, that's where there may be a disconnect, because you said you don't need to be entertained to know what's at stake in terms of policy and the wanting to be engaged. And I think when people see policy information or politics be communicated in an entertaining way, then maybe other generations don't take it as serious. That's not a way that people are really receiving real and or accurate information, that they're just there for a good time. Because I think a lot of TikTokers, and we talked about it, in our episode about leading up to the DNC and what was new, of them having a creators lounge and influencers there. And I've seen some articles where traditional media was upset that creators were almost given close to, or if not the same level of access as they were as traditional media. But the whole reason we brought them in is because they're reaching an entire section of the population that they are failing to reach, that people aren't looking to them for answers. So I think once we begin, and I would say not only did the DNC capture that, I think the current Harris-Walz campaign is capturing that these are different ways to capture these votes that say that they aren't interested or that are pessimistic, that don't intend to turn out, that these are ways that we can engage them of where they're at, that doesn't look like ways that it would engage or invite you to participate. And I think that pushback sometimes can also be almost like a doubling down on, like, I'm listening now, but I'm not listening the way you want me to. I'm getting information, but I'm not getting it the way you want me to. And I get that, but I'm just saying that's the way it could come across. Not that it.
I like a good girl. I like a good TikTok too. Now, and I'm a meme person. I love to talk in memes, and I think all of those things are great, but it has to be balanced. It can't be the only thing, and you can't always expect to be entertained. These are people making real life decisions. I love to see doctors and nurses doing TikToks. I don't need to see them doing it during surgery.
Correct.
because I need them focused. These are real jobs. And there's some strategery that goes into some of this, because you just can't get in front of the camera and argue with people. And so, and create, I'm gonna create a viral moment. The one thing that I really love about Jasmine Crockett, she's funny and she's serious. She can get a bill passed and she can do, but that's not every day.
Yeah. Oh, and to clarify, I wasn't talking about our actual elected officials, the ones doing TikToks. I was talking about the actual creators. Yeah, I was like, no, I want you to go do your job. I want somebody else to make hee hee ha ha's. I want you to do your job.
And I think that's a good point. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chantel.
Well, I was going to say, circling to your point about the content creators, because I know some of them that were there. I went on down to the content creator lounge to see what they had going on. There was only 200 of them, and it was 15,000 regular media folk there. And so, but they covered, I've been going through, like, looking at the content that they created versus the content that traditional media was creating. It was totally different. And they weren't throwing softball interviews. Some of them were funny, and all of them, they came to it from their different perspectives. But there was one that I read about this morning where he said he went to a veterans event because he had a hunch that the VP candidate was going to show up and some other people were going to show up. He said he was the only person there, and all it took was for him to RSVP. Traditional media didn't come. So traditional media isn't necessarily covering what we wanted to hear. If I can watch TV, I have watched MSNBC, I have watched Fox, I have watched CNN. They cover the same thing every show, every hour. There's enough content out there that they could change and talk about stuff all day, but they don't. They choose to talk about maybe 3 or 4 subjects and they rehash it, and then they bring on a bunch of talking heads who are not journalists to talk about this content.
You can tell that this is a sister girl conversation because we are all around the freaking mulberry bush. I am not sure. I mean, you ain't by yourself. We all around the mulberry bush on all the
bad.
I would just note this. I think what I hear the takeaways being in terms of how we are reaching young voters. One, it sounds like traditional media ain't it.
Nope.
2, I do think that there's a significant role that content creators and digital creators have to play in this space because they are consuming your content. And if you are a content creator on whatever subject matter that may be, if you throw a little politics in, you might be helping some of these sisters out and connecting them to issues that they care about. And, one of the final takeaways for me, and I think it's really one of the most important, is it's going to take everybody to get somebody out to vote. The reality is that there is no one leader anymore. This idea that it takes one, that we're waiting on a leader instead of all leaders, is just not working for us. We have to recognize leadership within ourselves and bring as many people as we can and let those people bring as many people as we can. We have to become, and I won't say become because I think we already are, but we have to embrace ourselves as a nation of leaders and be prepared to lead intergenerationally, as we're talking about today, but also, and probably more importantly, at your peer level. One of the most interesting things that has remained consistent, I've been looking and reading polls and research for well over 30 years now. It's crazy. And one of the things that remains consistent is that when you ask people who they trust about issues that they care about, consistently you see the people who they trust the most in life. You see parents, you see friends, families, neighbors, ministers, teachers, people who they already have a natural, trusting, sometimes I hate to use this word, organic trust relationship with. And I just think it's important that if you have an organic trust relationship with any individual, it's up to you to make sure that that circle of that network of those individuals who trust you, you have an obligation to make sure that they get out and vote this November. And I think if we do that, and we do that in a way that is not just using a message point, but using the language that we already use to talk to the people we already talk to, that's going to be the most effective thing any one person can do, regardless of what generation you may find yourself.
I agree with that.
Look at there. I see Simone nodding her head, so we might have got some damn where. Hey, listen, I want to thank both of you
We
as
agree.
usual for an engaging conversation. I think that if nothing else, we recognize that while everybody's voice is important, everybody can't reach everybody, which is why we need everybody to, as Michelle Obama said, do something. And I'm going to echo another thing that Michelle Obama said. Consider this your official invite to do something. I am asking you, no, I am actually demanding, encouraging, inspiring, and hopefully motivating you, if you are listening to this podcast, to take 10, 12, 15, however many people you feel like you can influence, that you have a true trusted relationship with. Sit down with them, have a conversation about this election, talk about some of the things that are important to you, and then vote. And then once you have voted, regardless of whatever the outcome will be, although we know it's going to be Kamala Harris for the win by a landslide, but regardless of whatever the outcome might be, that is not the beginning and end of your journey, but simply a stop along the way in your political participation. This has been another episode of Clap Back, Get the Facts. This intergenerational voting conversation has many, 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 many more tenets and legs that we could explore. And who knows, we may do exactly that. But what we do know is we will be back again next Thursday, dropping another episode. And we hope that you will return. Until then, like, follow, and subscribe. We're on all the cool and major podcast platforms. And make sure you check out our YouTube channel at Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on Clap Back Get the Facts podcast. We hope that you're leaving feeling more informed and ready to provide others with the facts. We would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this episode. So post the show on your Instagram story and tag us at Sisters Lead. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please leave a review so others can get some sense of the facts that we're providing. Finally, if you would like to learn more about local resources and other projects we're working on, go to sistersleadsistersvote.org.